You've talked on the podcast a lot about when you go to WWE in 2019, you and Paul Heyman are brought in as the executive directors. I think that was the name.
Right.
And you've said, your job was to kind of oversee for Vince McMahon. It feels wild to think 20 years before that Vince McMahon would appoint Eric Bischoff to oversee for him in a creative capacity. What was that like, generally dealing with Vince in 2019?
It was a nightmare. And the reason for that was we would be here all night if I really went into the proper detail. So I'm going to try to give you the short version of it. Around 2018, first of all, WWE is and was at that time a publicly held corporation, right? When you're a publicly held corporation, you're under a different kind of scrutiny. It's not like a family-owned business anymore. You have to perform and do certain things that you probably don't really want to do, but you have a board of directors, you have a responsibility to your shareholders. That's called a fiduciary responsibility in the United States. I don't know what it's called here. But you have an obligation to perform in a certain manner. And about 2018, a group of consultants came in because the board of directors wanted this group to come in and do what they call an executive audit. They want to come in and do a deep dive and research the operations of the company and make suggestions as to how to improve it. And that's a very common thing. It's not unusual at all. But this company came in. Now, Vince McMahon, because he probably in his mind was going, I don't want these people in here, I'm looking under my dress, I don't want. But you got to do what you got to do when you're a publicly held company. So this company came in, and they made a recommendation that because WWE was growing so quickly at the time, and the Fox deal was on the horizon, because that deal had been started, began negotiating a year or 2 years previous. It takes a long time to negotiate a deal like that. So this company came in and said, okay, we think in order for this to work, you need to hire an executive director of SmackDown and an executive director of Raw, whose jobs will be to oversee everything related to those two shows. Not only the creative, that was one part of it, the licensing, the merchandising, costuming, the live event side of it. I was in charge, theoretically, as it was described to me, over everything related to SmackDown. And Paul Heyman was in charge of everything related to Raw. That was the way the job was described to me when I was offered it. But my challenge was Vince wasn't letting anybody, me or Paul Heyman, make any decisions. We were given the job, we were giving an enormous amount of money, all of the above, but neither Paul nor I had any influence at all over anything. Now, what made it even more f***ed up was because SmackDown, I was hired in June, maybe May or June. I didn't show up in Connecticut until the end of July. You know, Lori and I had to pack up and make arrangements and move out to the East Coast and all that. So I showed up around the end of July. SmackDown, I think it aired in September.
October, I think. Beginning of October.
October 19th. You're right, October 19th. So there was a period of about 6 weeks where we're trying to come up with creative for SmackDown. First of all, along with all of the other changes, Raw was going to get its own writing team. SmackDown, I was going to get my team. Paul Heyman was going to get his team. But while we were trying to figure out who was going to get who on the writing staff, we couldn't tell anybody anything. I didn't know who was going to be on my team, number one. Number two, neither Paul or I knew who was going to be on our respective rosters because Vince McMahon wanted to make that decision, and he wanted to make that decision at the last minute. So I didn't know who my writing team was. I didn't know who my talent was. I wasn't really in control of anything, but on paper, I was in control of everything. So yeah, that was pretty up.